So, good afternoon, everyone. On the screen, introduce yourself, starting with Mr. Wake.
Is Lee at the moment. We've had some considerably more, and the likely if I call it, it's taken longer than I thought. She said by that was undue on my part, but it is still on track. And again, perhaps without breaking any commercial problems or concerns, if I could ask Steve to just again say where we are with that.
I think my understanding is that the conversation between the investors in the vessel, the potential investors in the vessel, and Condor are in a good place, and the ball, I suspect, is in both of their courts rather than the States. I think the discussions with Jersey have included that as well, because the most important part, perhaps, of a long-term operating agreement is a plan for investment.
Okay.
Other requirements. Absolutely correct. Amended between now and the 28th, 29th of June. And what it is say that we will make our best efforts to ensure that there's such resourcing as may be available. But certainly, no guarantee can be given.
Resources, we
priority actions, such as I understand that there are gaps in the States, but in terms of those priorities that you've identified this time round.
Well, what I can say from a policy point of view, those policy officers that are needed, losing 4 people, is going to need that they are going to be replaced, but that will take some time to get people up to speed. So yes, there are real difficulties in being able to manage it. It's just because of the environment that we're in, but that's where the full resources will go, and that's where the focus will be.
Whilst we're talking about priority actions, there's an interesting sentence right at the very last sentence of the policy letter, where you say the committee, however, is not unanimous in its agreement that all the actions listed in category 1 should be priority recovery actions when compared to other pressing issues and priorities, and as such this should not be seen as a priority recovery actions of the policy and resources committee. So you've emphasised that it's a matter ultimately for the states, but when you then look at
with these actions, because they reflect the broad breadth of government, making sure that we are covering things off that we need to do, and we work in the consensus system of government. I was happy for this because it came out of all the work that the officers had done, working with the committees, bringing out their the key aspects of the key areas that committees believe need to be focused on, and where there were cross-committee views that they agreed with, that they thought, well, that is what we need to develop on. So that's how it evolved. It wasn't that the 10 here weren't things that, as a committee, we had discussions on and said, oh, this, that, and the other. It really did come up from a committee level, and I think for me, it's a good broad balance of things. But it's up to the states. They can. Well, we thought it's up to the states to decide. It is their plan after all. It's not P&R. So whether we agree or disagree is probably not so relevant as the fact that we have to get the states to actually agree something.
I mean, I agree with Deputy Salisbury's comments. What our individual views are will be a matter for the debate on the 28th of June. But ultimately, they're just views from, of 38, 39 people, however many people were there on that day.
Just for the record, I supported the majority view here. But I do understand, having seen several iterations of government business plans of various sorts, that we have always been over-ambitious. I think this is the best of the lot that I've seen. And of course, timing-wise, and for some of the reasons we've just discussed previously, we're unlikely to be able to achieve all that we've got here. So I can understand those who say we should narrow it down even more. But there's, in my mind, a debate as to how much time we spend horizon scanning for what is reasonable and what isn't. I think it's reasonable that we should aim for this, recognising that we probably won't achieve, certainly in the time frame concerned, all the things that we expect to achieve.
So, Deputy Hello, do I take it you're in the minority?
I was in the minority, yes, but I accept that we reached that view as a democratic process, and it is what it is.
Right, but
I'm not here to answer personal questions about my views. That's the committee view.
right, yeah, but the committee view, as expressed in the policy letter, is that you're not in unanimous agreement. So I'm trying to establish who's not in unanimous agreement, and you're part of that.
Yes.
And presumably Deputy Mahoney as well. Where is Deputy Mahoney?
He's out of the island at the moment.
And Deputy Mahoney's position?
Sorry?
Deputy Mahoney's position?
Well, Deputy Bailey can speak for his own position. I mean, I think one of the passages, and rightly you've drawn that to our attention, but the point is, this isn't a P&R plan. This is a
I understand that, yes.
Sorry,
Yep.
if I could just finish the point. It is, and we had a healthy debate. We always have healthy debates on every issue, but we had a healthy debate on this particular issue. Everybody's view was constructive, but certain people had different emphasis, that was all. And in fact, if you read, as I'm sure everybody has, from paragraph 1.8 of the policy letter, which quotes from a policy letter of the 12th of February 2021, and I think these words are equally appropriate today, the ambition of the new Assembly is prodigious and cannot easily be met. So the reality is that it will be making difficult decisions. And I think some of our colleagues were just saying, look, we should be sharper. They weren't criticising the process, they weren't being negative. We have consensus government, and we've made the decision that is recorded in the policy letter.
Okay. My final point before I hand back to the Chair, and this is probably for officers to take away, I think actually if you had merged Appendix 5 and 6, it would have made it an easier read to read the comments of the committee and then the comments of the P&R against the comments of the committee. It would have just been a little easier to follow. So if that could be taken away as an action for the next version, please. Thank you, Chair.
Deputy Fairclough, want a question for?
Yeah, just picking up on the actions, and we've referred to one already, actions raised by committees. The case for investment in a new dairy is discussed. It appears that P&R may not agree with the recommendations emanating from STSB, the State's Trading and Supervisory Board. Now, the Roffey-Fairbrush amendment that's been submitted for debate will, if successful, allow the project to be included in the 2023 plan. Could you tell us what the P&R position is regarding the timescale of constructing a new dairy?
Well, it's a very difficult question because my previous role was president of the STSB. There were problems with the dairy then. It was built in early 1950s. It's had some work done to it along the years, but it's a patch and mend. And the latest figure that we were given was that the cost of replacing the dairy with all the kit that needs to be done, moving along, would be in excess of £35 million. Now, that was a figure that was significantly more than the figure that we've been quoted before. And our view was that it needed more, no pun intended, it needed more scrutiny. It needed more consideration. So, therefore, we weren't prepared to advance it this year. And what the amendment proposed by Deputy Roffey and seconded by me says is we'll look at it very much next year.
Which effectively will set by resolution what we were intending to do anyway.
Yeah.
I think the majority of us here believe that a new dairy is needed. I was on the Dairy Review Board. I had a lot to do with the review that was debated in the last term but one, and I believe we very much need it. But it was around what are the specifications, and what are we actually getting here? Do we need what was in there? And I think we need to be just a bit more forensic in what we end up with, instead of just saying, right, we need a big specs done. And I have to say that the work done by the people that we used to specify and show what was needed in a dairy and the research they did was very good. It was very comprehensive, very good. But we're just questioning, so look, we've got to look at value for money. Do we need that bit of kit specifically? Does it need to be that size? It's just so as we've got more assurance that we are spending the money wisely. So it's not stopping things. It's just making sure that before we get through to all various business cases, that we've got something we can work with. And then after that, of course, it's making sure that we've got the money for it. Because at the moment, if we support the dairy and put that as delivery, it's extra money that's going to have to be found.
And how important is the dairy industry to Guernsey, would you say?
I'd say very important.
Oh, great, yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to. Very dangerous for me to do that. But it's very important. As an economic enabler, I wouldn't look at it from that. But it was like I read an article from Jeremy Clarkson something the other day, and he was saying, look, he was making the point that in relation to certain places in Wales, you finance sheep farms because it's good for the environment, it's good for the countryside, but it's never going to make any money. Now, farms in Guernsey are small, even the biggest farm is small, but if we didn't have a dairy, we would have cheap imported English milk, we would lose our countryside, we would lose our herd, and Guernsey would be a much worse place. So, speaking personally, I think a new dairy is important.
Yeah, and for me, people say, well, it's going to lose money. What's the point in doing it? We shouldn't be involved, but because it's costing us a lot of money every year. But for me, well, we spend lots of money on education and on health. We're not expecting there to be a monetary return on that. And so in the same way as we invest in education, we invest in health, it's investing in the environment. So that's where I come from anyway.
And just again, I was certainly not in favour of the plans as they currently stand, partly because I think there's been very little creativity in looking at how the money is spent in terms of investment for the future and incentives for dairy farming. I agree with all the points that have been made, but I think there's been largely from SDSB one answer to the problem, and I don't think they've seriously looked at the whole industry generally and how we can create something that is more creative and entrepreneurial in the future. And so from that point of view, I wasn't happy to support it as it is, apart from the fact that the price keeps on going up.
Yes.
Would it be fair to say that a £35 million given expenditure on a declining industry is not a good idea, as opposed to your words earlier, patch and mend?
Well, I think the point in relation to that is that, following on from Deputy Lattock's point, I believe there should be a new dairy, but I'm not sure that £35 million is. It could be honed, it could be cut back, and we could still have an effective new dairy. Certainly a number of millions Deputy Gabriel's got to be spent on it, but whether it's 10, 15, 20 or whatever is a matter that still needs further scrutiny.
And there's a difference between a declining industry and a dead industry. If we don't invest, if the dairy breaks down, then that will be an issue. We do see that there are potential savings to be made when there is a new dairy, and I think that will have to be factored into the final decision.
I think it's a changing industry, and I think it needs to be recognised that there needs to be different emphasis and there are opportunities for that. And we have a number of entrepreneur products that we could look into, but in terms of what's currently on the table, it wouldn't do anything to stimulate that and incentivise it. And I think that really does need to be looked into. I mean, outside of the island, apart from anything else, in terms of branding, probably until the literary and potato peel pie thing came along, if you said you came from Guernsey, in many parts of the world, they said, oh, where the cows come from. And that is something that I think helps to put Guernsey on the map, not just in the traditional way, perhaps, that it's seen in some economic settings. So I do think it's worthwhile investing, but we've got to do that wisely. And at the moment, I'm not satisfied that this is wise investment.
Can I just add, I grew up in a dairy family. My grandfather was a dairy farmer. So we have to accept that the guardians of our environment are, largely speaking, in the island, are farmers. So just shutting down a dairy or having an industry that's dying is not a financial answer to the problem of how do you look after the environment if those individuals are not there. So we may be paying a stealth tax for our milk at the moment, which we effectively are, because quite a substantial amount of it's just poured down the drain, having been bought by the dairy. But equally, the States is not very good at running commercial businesses. And I say that we need to take both of those things into account, the costs and benefits of both of those sides of the argument.
So would you be looking at privatising the dairy as a possible way forward?
Well, I'm not sure that all of those options have been explored, and I'm not by no means an expert in it. I've not sat on STSB or on the dairy board, but I do think it needs another look at.
Okay.
We're jumping around a bit here, but obviously there's a lot in this plan. And on to paragraph 4.8, where it says there's been good progress in the reciprocal health agreement negotiations with the UK. When will we see the outcome of these negotiations? And can you give a ballpark on any expected annual cost of such a system?
Just very soon. I think Deputy Salisbury really is the expert on that.
Yeah, I mean, the negotiations on this began previous term when I was in a different seat, and it was actually responsibility for P&R to run with it, which we have done this term. Things have been delayed because of COVID, and as the UK things have been ebbing and flowing. But we are reviewing draft policy letters tomorrow, and hopefully for debate in the States by the end of July debate.
Because it's got to be an urgent matter, because the policy letter, the covering paper with the policy letter, we're seeing health and social care tomorrow. There's a timetable from the UK of mid-September, I think.
Yes.
So therefore, the states will have to make a decision by July, otherwise we'll miss the boat for years. It won't just be putting it back for a few months, it will be years. This is an opportunity that and I regard it as an opportunity that we'll need to grasp very quickly.
I think in terms of cost, I think it's around, is it 300,000? Yes. I think was the annual cost that would effectively cost us, which is it's lost revenue as opposed to putting money out, because it will be a knock-for-knock arrangement, which we were expecting. But this is the UK now, after post-Brexit, wanting to find arrangements that they have to do with the EU and elsewhere. It's been a good time for us to take advantage of that.
Is that why there's such a narrow window right now? Because this is something that has taken some time, isn't it?
Yeah, it has. And of course, again, at one time the UK government were just saying no.
They said no, yes.
Yeah, that's right. I mean,
Sorry, John.
But I've been. I was thinking I've been involved in talking to and trying to get, lobbying in the UK probably for 10 years on this issue, and it was just knocking at a closed door that was never going to open. It's one of the benefits of Brexit from our point of view that door has opened, but we need to make sure that we can make use of it while it's still open, because it will be very short-lived, I think.
Thank you.
Continuing on the theme of health and social care, last week the President of Health and Social Care, Deputy Brouard, advised the Assembly of significant number of people waiting for treatment and the very long waiting times for operations and investigations too at the hospital. Has HSC approached P&R for additional funds to tackle this problem?
Yes, they have. We've agreed for a process by which they can plan the reduction of the waiting lists. I mean, I know how difficult it is, and certainly in the current climate where the UK is in even a worse position, and so finding the resources to do it is going to be difficult. The ability to move people off into the UK and have operations will be difficult, but we have agreed that it's something that needs to be done.
Well, how does that tie in with the 900,000 reduction in the wait list initiative, which is identified in the funding and investment plan?
That is it.
So it's a reduction in.
In last year's plan, the overall amount expected to be required for the initiative was higher than it is now, so it's reduced.
Sorry, but in response to the first question, that was P&R have been approached for additional funding, but now you're telling us it's a
No, the funding has. So there was funding included in the funding and investment plan last year and through the budget, but P&R has been approached in order to release that funding to HSC. So that's been done recently. But overall, they're expecting that the overall amount will reduce by about 900,000 from previous estimates.
Right.
Okay, thank you. The policy letter, as referenced earlier, has got a helpful section on key actions raised by the committees in Annex 5. In the section on Employment and Social Security, ESS, the committee highlights the undercapacity in the care home sector. and outlines the knock-on effects on health and social care in terms of using beds that could otherwise be used for those needing hospital procedures. It's stated that neither committee can resource this issue, HSC and ESS, so what are policy and resources doing to assist in resolving these matters?
There is an outstanding resolution in terms of long-term care, and that is something that we are addressing now. But it's a difficult situation. Last term, ESS put forward an option in terms of equity release. I think up to 35,000. That state bottled it. It was sold as something that it wasn't, which has put us in the pickle we're in now, and needs to be addressed. That is part of the issue, but it's also about moving the care home sector into a place where they will invest into care homes, and that is the issue we have. Whether we can attract UK providers, I think that is something that has been investigated. It is one thing. It's whether we can support the care homes into the existing care homes into investing. But it's something very much on the radar, because it's constantly an issue. I think the worst thing, and I said this before, we ever did was closing the King Edward Hospital and expecting the market, the private sector, to suck all that up, and they haven't done. And so we're paying the price for that now.
And part of their problem as well is that they can't get staff. They can't get staff. I mean, there are certain private homes that are as full as they can be, but they could get extra people. Not enough extra people, by the way, but they could get some more, but they just haven't got the staff to be able to look after those people.
Just in Deputy Salisbury, picking up that question of the last state's bottling.
It wasn't the last days, it was the states before that.
Bottling the decision, as you put,
for the, yes.
long-term care,
Leaves, yeah.
but using your phrase. There doesn't appear to be, in anywhere that I can find in this document, any appetite to revisit that decision, either from the Committee for Employment and Social Security or PNR, as far as I can tell. Is that right?
It's not one of the top 10 actions, but I think within there, I think with some of the actions relating to it, I think it is there somewhere, but it's not one of the top 10 priority actions.
Do you think there would be value in doing that? Because I think you're right that the way it was reported on, if not sold otherwise, it was misconstrued as to what it was.
Mm. Yeah, well, I'd say that personally. I mean, this is something.
Yes.
We would have a different view.
All right, okay.
I don't think it was misconstrued at all, in my view. I appreciate and respect the views of others.
Yeah, no.
I don't want to get into a debate on that particular issue today. But,
okay.
Well, the problem, I think, really, the problem was it came to the States far too late.
Yes.
That was the issue.
Okay.
And it was like within weeks of us breaking up from the States.
But the problem, if I can just add to it, isn't just with, in terms of the hospital bed release, is in community care as well, and in getting staffing there, because it isn't that we just need more nursing homes. Sure, we do, absolutely, but we need better and a more effective community care. And at the moment, as has been mentioned, it's very difficult to recruit nurses, even if the pay was higher. It's not certain at all. It's not the answer to doing it. Everywhere has got difficulties in recruitment.
Yes, because part of the whole scenario coming out of the SLAWS policy letter was around increasing that community care, but so there's less demand pushed into the care homes. But if you can't get the staff to do that, those are the places where we have difficulty.
Yeah, just on the potential transfer of housing stock to the GHA, do we have an estimate of the value of that stock at this stage?
Yeah.
I've heard various numbers, but we've seen no papers.
Right, and given that you've identified that there'd be a 12 million net negative impact on general revenue, which isn't reflected in the overall funding gap, for the long-term funding gap for the states. What's the driver for this, and what would be the benefits that could be realised for the states?
Let me say again, my view, it'd be more efficiently run, with no disrespect to those that already run it. But the GHA has proven itself to be first rate at the job that it does. And there would be the £12 million reduction, net reduction, overall income about 20 million, so 12 million reduction. But there would be a figure of X. Now, whatever that X is, that figure would then be available to the states. Again, my own view is, because that would be a matter for the states and it hasn't been debated yet, that would be ring-fenced for housing, for various housing schemes.
But it's not something we've actually,
No.
we haven't had any paper on it yet at all, so we'll...
Okay. I'm just going, if I may, I'm going to delve into the funding and investment plan, which will mainly probably be questions for Deputy Hillier and the Chief Resources Officer. Are we going to be changing the job title on the banknotes to reflect the new role? If we could turn to the graph, the table under 4.1 in Appendix 8. We say at 4.4 that 4.1. You say in 4.4 that income tax has grown very significantly in 2021, but it's going to grow more slowly in 2022 to 2025. But actually, in 4.1, we basically have no growth at all in income tax. It's flat.
I think the numbers that are in the table assume that secondary pensions is implemented next year, and of course that has an impact on our income tax receipts. So that's largely explains that flat.
Thank you. Continuing on that, further down that table, unallocated savings of 1.1. What do they relate to? I mean, it looks like a finger in the air.
The savings that are there are basically savings that have previously been approved by the states as to include within the framework, but they haven't been finalised yet in terms of how they're going to be delivered.
So that's different from transformation savings?
Yes.
Okay. Capital income is really is, insignificant. So that would imply that there's no expectation of any sale of any state's properties. And given what we've heard before about the ambition to release states' properties from states' use, that surprises me. So could you just talk us through what the expectations are around that capital income and why it is so low?
Yeah, I think what we've tried to bake into the numbers is those properties which we know are in the pipeline and which are likely to be sold. Obviously, we have more certainty for 2022, but a little for future years. We haven't baked in yet any of the any buildings which are still occupied and which may be sold in the future. So there is some upside in there potentially.
Politically, how satisfied are you with the speed of progress in terms of the realisation of properties? Because that is almost, dare I say it, not worth bothering with. It is so insignificant in the scale of the state's finances. That would suggest that progress is glacial. Would you agree with that?
Well, it's about around the preparation and the property target operating model, the work being done on that, which has now started and is we're getting momentum on that. Everything needed quite a bit of a restructure at the beginning of term, but I think it's moving quite quickly now. And I think that will result in release of properties that can then be either sold or repurposed in some way. So that's why it's very little at the moment, I believe. I mean,
yeah, I don't think it's
say more.
It's not going to be big bucks anyway. When you look at the properties that have been sold, they've been sold for the best commercial value at the time. But there isn't, when you put aside the social housing, which is a big figure, whatever that figure is, the rest of it is a few million here and a few 100,000 there. All very important, but it isn't going to suddenly turn that figure into 20 million, unless I'm mistaken, Treasurer. Is that right? That's right.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, carrying on down the table. we've got under the GWP revenue impact, we've got a line that reads recovery brackets ongoing. This, that's the total for the period 2022-25 is 19.3 million, which is up from 14 million last year. So it's 5.3 million growth. Could you just again talk us through that increase in recovery expenditure?
Chief, whatever that's new title is, I think that links back to the tables further along, does it not? And it's linked, so you've got ongoing total and one-off total, and it's not, pages aren't numbered, but it's the end of their, quite a lot, the long tables in at the end of that appendix.
Well, I'm glad you've drawn attention to Annex 3, because I was going to ask a question about that, because obviously there's an awful lot of blanks in Annex 3, which suggests that quite a lot of the recovery actions haven't been costed, or any estimate of the resources made. Is that correct?
Well, in some areas, of course, you're not going to have full costings and know what they are. I mean, the focus here is on what resources do we need to do that work. In some areas, it might not need resources. Other areas, it might be that it's because their actions are for later in the term and we won't be costing them yet. I don't know whether Steve, you've got any more you'd like to add on that.
No, I think that's lots of work is going on with officers to take to committees as well around what the funding would look like, and in part of it, some of the steps that will be taken are dependent on what the States agrees in due course as well.
So you would expect, based on those responses, then that this plan this time next year, that recovery line will be up again, as you've identified further recovery.
No, not necessarily, because some things all fall away, or we decide we're not going to do them at all, or we've already done them. So it's going to be moving. I mean, it is transitional. I think we have to remember it started from ground zero, as it were, and working our way up in terms of trying to have a more detailed plan as we can. I think by the end of the term, we'll have something that will be a really good resource for the next states to run with it and have the background with which to make decisions quite early in that term, in a way that hasn't been so easy this term, but although we have been working at quite some speed.
Okay. I'm going to keep moving. I'm just conscious of time. There's quite a few questions to get through. Transformation savings, the next line, has obviously fallen significantly. And I mean, I think probably the overall thing of note in relation to this plan is the expectations of savings have pretty well evaporated across the board. But certainly in relation to transformation, we're throwing an awful lot of money at transformation, but expecting to get very little back from it. And again, I'd be welcome some, I guess, particularly from the
I think that it was ill thought out when it was started off previously, and I think that because I was one of the people that, as president of the STSB, that supported it on the basis that I thought those putting it forward had more detail and more information than they did. Once the surface was scratched, there was very little substance. And it's turned out to be a disappointment. That's not to say that people haven't done their best. It's cost more than it should to bring the benefit that it has. But you're right. I mean, for 2023, for there to be 900,000, 2024, 1.8 million, 2025, 2.6 million, those are, to me, disappointing figures. Better than nothing, but it is a disappointment.
Yeah, I mean, it lead up to, we're looking at about 4.2 million recurring savings. But I think the whole thing was started from the wrong direction. There was this big picture thing and about getting rid of 200 posts and complete transformation here and everything like that. When there should have been a focus on HR transformation, how those processes work, and finance transformation. The actual bare bones and nitty gritty of how does the states do things. Getting that sorted first before going to the big transformational changes. And I think just looking at it and where we are now, I think back last term, I have to say, I do think it was the wrong way around. Now, I know I was critical of the concepts at the beginning, but I do think that that's how it's played out. Saying that, what has been done is the right thing to do in terms of the service to the community, how things are done, because it'll save money in the long run by having more efficient and effective processes, which is always going to be important. We've got throughout the states different ways of doing things, not very digitalised. And it's not designed for the public, for those people who want to use our services. It's much more designed for the people running the services than for the people who need them. So it's absolutely the right thing to do. I just think, probably the Eric Morecambe way of doing things, not necessarily in the right order.
But are we capturing the benefits of these transformation programmes?
Yes, I mean,
because that's not spelt out in here. In essence, if we're not doing it for the savings, we must be doing it for another reason.
Well, that is not true. We are doing it for savings as well. I just think what was very much vaunted about 200 posts going and how easy that would be was definitely the wrong approach to take. It's always about making things work better. For me, if you get the model right, the finances will follow, and that is what we're doing at the moment. I think there will be more savings on the over £1 million we have saved already, 1.1 million, I think there's 1.5 million, even better. So they are happening, and we will see much more this year. It doesn't look like it from there, but actually I think there will be more realised savings over the next year.
But also in relation to your point, it isn't just about saving money, although that's important. It is about improving the service to the public. And that costs money in itself. So that's transformation. You're transforming how you did things from how you. So it's a twofold purpose.
I'm glad you said that, David Fairbrusher, about delivering service to the public, because in the transformation expenditure forecast in Annex 2, you've got transformation and two large items in there. One of them being 21.6 million for the MyGov programme.
Yeah.
Could you explain in more detail, please, what that programme will entail, and how the benefits will be realised, and when for an investment of that size?
Well, it started. I mean, that's the whole programme that's been going on since last term, since 2015. So that's a programme that the full cost in there. So 60 million was already approved by the previous states. And that's what that is about. The MyGov is the change in the customer hub. So we share services across the states, much more joined up. People they contact the hub, only have to contact one point. And that the start of that is being phased in. That will start 2 weeks' time. And there'll be a much more public communications going out to explain what that means and what people need to do. We've had a lot of work behind the scenes on that. Last time we had our briefing, we were in the middle of the job evaluation process, and there was little more we could say. And that's been done. Jobs have been placed, and Edward T. Wheaton House is going to be used for the first move of the people from the driver and licensing area from Buller Avenue. So that is happening. The other part of MyGov is a property transformation, and we've spoken about that. And that is in the process of happening right this moment, where we bring together property service support across the states and into one service hub. And that there will be one contact for people for that as well. So it's about making services more effective, more efficient, and future-proofing it in a way that if we don't do that, we will need more and more people to support different areas of the state. So it will, in terms of costs that we will not have to have. It's a benefit from that as well.
I think also in relation to that, you're exactly right to highlight 21.5 million. That wasn't the figure that was originally quoted. The figure was less than that, 16.7 or 16, I think 16.7. It's grown like Topsy. And again, without any undue criticism of anybody, it wasn't as well thought out initially as it should have been.
The 60 million is for where we are at the moment. We'll need more resource for the next bit, which is talking about the HR transformation, finance transformation, and enabling services.
It sounds as if you're adapting or being tempted to adapt a number of things that you've inherited as a committee from the previous term, particularly from what you're saying, Deputy Fairbrusher. Have you ever been tempted to press the reset button completely and say, we need to go about doing this a different way?
my Gov project, it had already got such impetus. Of course, we're looking at it. You don't just go ahead, you just don't walk on the straight path to Rome if you realise that you've got to diverge a bit. What we've done is, in relation to that, is carry on with it, but be very conscious of where we're trying to go. But it's a bit like trying to stop a train going 100 miles an hour. It's taken some attenuation. I think Heidi was going to say something.
Yeah, I mean, last summer was when we decided whether we would press the button for the extra 7.8 from the 60 million that had been approved by the states in the previous term. And that's where we put things on hold for quite a bit to ascertain where what the actual position was, because we weren't getting a single version of the truth. Now we're more confident. The interim chief executive has been doing a lot of work to make sure we have more confidence in that process, and we have now. We've brought in Director of Operations from Employment, Social Security and Education. I think he's got 2 roles, who's really added, he's got a lot of expertise in that transformation field, and he's given us much more assurance as well, so it's more joined up. I think when we inherited it was very much held very tightly amongst a small number of officers, but now it's about making sure that there's ownership across the board, the senior leadership team, that they're happy with it and that people know what's going on. I don't know, Steve, Bethan, you want to add any more to that?
Can I pursue some questions on Annex 2 whilst we've got it in front of you, given on the back of Deputy Gabriel's question? 2 observations. You've got 3 tables on that page, A, B and C. It's interesting that table A and C, you've chosen to present the best case rather than the middle case.
When you say Annex 2, you're not talking about Appendix 2?
No, I'm talking about Annex 2 to the funding.
The funding investment plan?
Yeah. So I just make that as an observation. Everywhere else you use the middle case, but you've chosen to use the best case for those 2 tables. Could you just speak, and again, probably this is one for the Chief Resources Officer and the Treasury Lead, the Revenue Service, or the first table entitled RICE, Revenue Impact of Capital Expenditure. All of the items in there differ from the table that was presented last year. Could you just explain how that works in practice? Because all the things that were there last year would obviously have an ongoing revenue impact. So why do they not appear this time round?
So if they've been dealt with, if they've been implemented, then the ongoing implication would be picked up as part of the baseline. Right. So it would no longer be these are new things that are still to come through. I'd just like to highlight the revenue service one, because I'm preempting a question there. So that is actually, as you'll be aware, the expectation is that following the implementation of the revenue service programme, our ongoing costs in relation to our systems will be less than it was previously. This is dual running cost for a period of time while we're building our new systems, and the old systems have not yet been switched off.
Right.
So that's what that is. It would, if you show 2026, it will have fallen away.
Okay. The next question I have is on again picking up on Deputy Gabriel's table in the middle, B, transformation expenditure. This of course is on top of revenue spending, isn't it? So transforming education has appeared this year when it wasn't there last year. So a total of 7.2 million over the period. There's an awful lot of extra funding going into education, both on the general revenue side, somebody's got the numbers to hand, and also on this capital side, on the transforming side. Just talk to us a little bit about that.
Could I just pick up on a technical point to start with? So previously, as you'll know, the States hasn't particularly accounted for capital and capital assets in the way that one would normally do. And so sometimes transformation expenditure has been sort of meshed in with capital expenditure. We've separated that out. So that accounts for that line there, transforming education, which was previously included as part of the capital programme. But being as it is transformational in nature, we wouldn't be able to capitalise, as include it as an asset at the end of the work. We've now shown it more clearly as transformation expenditure.
So is that 7.2 so 7.2 reduction on the capital side,
Yes.
or actually has that number gone up overall?
Well, capital has moved, obviously, as well. So other elements of capital have moved, but that 7.2 was previously in capital and has now been moved in here.
Right, because when you then turn back to the table on 4.8, there's another 9.4 million, which is 5 million extra for promoting education, skills and learning. By the way, this, just so you know, this table doesn't actually tie in with the annex, with Annex 3. And the differences are, in relation to education and invest in the finance sector, your totals don't cross-refer. The Annex 3 to the plan, you've got 2.5 million for investing in finance sector and 8.8 million for education. But nonetheless, let's work with what you've got on this table, which is an additional 9.4 million, 5 million up on last year. There is a note here at the bottom of that page, which accounts for about 2.8 million of that. If you read that note, talks about recovery actions and so on. But there's quite a bit missing. I'm just trying to get my head round the gap between the 2.8 that you've explained to us in note 5 and the 5 million change between 21 and 22.
I'm afraid I don't have an answer to that off the top of my head. I would need to go and look at the numbers in more detail.
Okay, I mean, it is a big number.
Yep.
And of all the numbers that have moved in the entire plan, the biggest ones relate to education. So, which is why I put
Yep.
to you again that the thing that has significantly changed in the last 12 months is a lot more money is being pumped into education. Some of it purports to be related to recovery from COVID, but the rest of it really is about funding the existing system. I think an additional 35 posts.
That's right, 35 places.
Yeah, I just wonder whether it is that 1.3 and then the 1.1 million recurring. Is that over 2 million? That's what I think it is. But we can go back and go.
To
Yeah.
the Scrutiny Management Committee with those details. That's fine. Thank you very much. Okay, are you done on that then, Deputy Pierre?
Two final questions on the finance plan, and then I think I'm done. Budget measures. You've abandoned any budget measures for 2022 and not really expecting much in the following 2 years. Again, that's clearly a political decision, so perhaps that might be one for Deputy Hellier to explain.
No, there will be some provisions in the budget, but they don't form part of the government work plan. They sit outside of that. So we've taken various comments from members, which will be built in when we get to that point.
Sorry, how can it not have an impact on the plan? Because it's going to either raise or reduce revenue.
Yes.
But the net effect is nil.
Yes, the net effect is nil. That's what's being planned for at the moment.
Okay.
But when we get to the budget, it might look slightly different.
So it could be an improvement if we actually introduce new measures in
Yeah.
the budget,
Yeah.
and so that will show in next year's update of the plan.
That's right.
Thank you.
Could I just provide a slight clarification as well? For 2022, those budget measures have been approved by the states and therefore are included in our baseline.
Okay.
And for 2023 and ongoing years, that indicates the amount that's been approved by the states.
Right.
So that is the minimum amount that needs to be delivered through budget measures over this period as approved in last year's government work plan.
And then my final question, net investment return for 2022, you've got 46.1 million. So what rate of return are you assuming for 2022? And are you still comfortable with that, given events? And I know this plan was only put to bed on the 12th of May, but...
I think you can only go with best estimates, reasonable estimates, based on the professional advice that we get. And but when the plan was created, when this was drafted, which is now, as you say, quite some time ago, that was a reasonable estimate. I'd have to say now it looks quite an uphill struggle.
What does that translate into? As well?
The assumption is 2.5% real, in
Right.
line with the investment objective,
Yeah.
and that's been forecast all the way through.
Right.
But yes, in light of recent conditions, that might
So
not
that
look.
must be one of your significant risks on the outturn.
Absolutely. I mean, last year was a good year,
This year may well not be, for the reasons we all know.
Yes, I mean it was particularly, we were particularly lucky because we had some windfalls as a result of swings in the market and so on, and that we are going into an environment that many people that work in finance have never seen before. I'm unlucky to have lived through a high interest rate environment in the past. Many people haven't, so that is one of the reasons for being less confident about that approach. But if it needs to be revised before the budget, then it will be.
Okay, thank you.
Right, just shortly before we break, just a couple of hopefully quick questions and then we'll take a short break. At the last hearing, Deputy Mahoney had just announced plans to see 94 and 5-bedroom homes created on greenfields and agricultural land surrounding the Cattell Hospital. Can you just update the panel, please, as to what further work, if any, has been undertaken on that proposal?
I think at the moment, none particularly.
No, we
I
haven't
think
seen
I don't think
anything.
we've advanced it at all in the 4 months or so that has passed.
Okay, thank you. That was a quick answer. And then finally for this part, the recent decisions taken in the States in respect of the Development Agency require the Assembly to decide on how the harbours will be configured, and then following that the DPA will produce the local planning briefs necessary for guiding development on the East Coast, in particular the harbour action areas. This process is expected to take 2 years. What will the Development Agency be doing during those 2 years, and how will it meet its objective of being self-funding in that time?
Well, I think in relation to self-funding, we'll be expecting the executive and the directors, call it whatever you will, of the agency to assist us in regard to ideas for self-funding. As to the harbour, the intention is to bring a policy letter to the States before the end of this year. Might be October, November, but before the end of this year, because one of the things the Development Agency is going to have to grapple with is what's the state's appetite. For example, should there be a third harbour? Should we concentrate our efforts on St Peter Port or St Sampson's or whatever? And that's something that we believe in our early discussions is something that the state should say what it wants.
Okay, and I certainly understand that. So if that happens in 6 months, let's say we have a decision on the state's direction for how the harbour should be developed. Nevertheless, until the local planning briefs come out, is there not a limited amount that the Development Agency can do?
Yeah, of course there is, because the local planning briefs are an important part of the exercise. There is some work they could do, but this is a long-term project, the Development Agency. There are some things that they might be able to do in early course, but I think it's the medium course before we're going to see any, again, especially my personal view, and it's still in its early. We haven't even appointed anybody to run it yet, but that is being done now as we speak. I mean, we're going through that process. That it will be a medium term before we see any real results.
So is it premature to be setting up a development agency when we've got 2 years of work to do before
I don't think
really?
it's premature. You've got to start somewhere. I don't think it's premature at all.
Okay, but you feel that they could nevertheless be self-funding within 2 years, even
Well,
with
they
this,
will tell us they can't, and then we'll have to go say to the states, the expectations that it would be self-funding after 2 years haven't been met, and this is the situation.
Okay.
Whatever that may be at the time.
Right, thank you very much. We'll take a short break if we can be back by 3:10 on the clock up there. Thank you. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Right, I shall hand over to Deputy Gabriel, who has the next questions.
And referring back to priority 2 of the work plan, managing the effects of Brexit and meeting international standards is clearly identified in the update report, an area that requires substantial financial resources. We've got over £1 million per annum of revenue spend in Annex 2 again, and substantial input from a significant number of senior staff and relevant politicians. And in June 2018, a Channel Islands Political Oversight Board was established with a pledge to work together to share expertise and deliver high-quality services to islanders. In March 2019, a meeting was held to discuss working together on Brexit, amongst other things. So my question is, to what extent are we working together with Jersey on matters other than Brexit?
Well, I wasn't expecting you to end up at that with that question, so I was all ready to think. Other than Brexit, well, in my experience of working with Jersey, I think there have been many ups and downs. I think actually in the area of external relations, external affairs, we work very closely together, irrespective of whether there's an agreement to do so or not. Our teams worked well together, our officials work well together. We have to, we're sort of thrown into that environment. Jersey's teams, I've discovered recently, they've got over 30 in external relations, whereas we have increased. When I started 10 years ago, we had 3, and we've got 7 or 8 now, but it's nothing like that. But we have to work together. Outside of that, though, it's been largely disappointing, and I think that's for all sorts of reasons. Some of them are political. Our terms are not aligned, so when we would need political engagement and political agreement to be able to work together outside of the obvious things like that. And it's been a great disappointment to me as a Channel Islander and a federalist in many ways to see that we can't do that, because it would certainly be areas where efficiencies, greater efficiencies, would be available. I think, I was one of those that suggested 6 or 7 years ago that we should seek to have a Channel Island health authority, a joint health authority. Now, we had a shadow board put up. There was a lot of input put in from our end, Deputy Soulsby particularly. And then Jersey had initially a lot of keenness, but then they've got waylaid with their hospital plans, and there wasn't the motivation there to do more together. That's a huge shame, because it would benefit, I think, Channel Islanders of all islands if we had joint working there. But to be honest, in response to your question, not a lot, and we would have to, I think, create, first of all, terms that at least were aligned, the political terms, to be able to work effectively. Obviously, after Jersey's election at the end of next month, well, in a few weeks' time, in fact, we will no doubt meet and do what we've always done and see how the land lies and where we can work together. But then, in due course, we'll have ours, and we've got a very limited window to work together, and there might be a complete change in respect of where they would like to work or what they would like to do. So, from my point of view, it's quite disappointing.
The reality is, despite having 3 years left of this term, which is a significant period in which joint working could be developed, the reality is this plan doesn't envisage any joint working.
Doesn't mean there's nothing in there that says we're not. It doesn't say we will not talk to Jersey. No. I can absolutely say we put so much effort in the last term to try and find synergies with Jersey. I then chief officer spent an awful lot of time talking to and going to Jersey, and probably more to him going to Jersey than Jersey coming to Guernsey at a time. Jersey's in quite a bit of turmoil with they had their new chief executive who was storming, as it were, and really completely changing the landscape. There are lots of people in kind of interim roles and you never knew who was going to be there at any one time, and that they have been and I absolutely believe there are savings to be made in the health in the health front, in the environment sphere as well. That there are savings to be made, but it takes two to tango. And when the Jersey have been so focused on their hospital, I don't know if they've actually agreed to where they're going to build it yet. They might have done, but they still haven't gone through their whole process of actually agreeing and a spade in the ground. That's taken years and years and years. So that has been their focus. I know that the discussions about stuff that they could run out of Jersey, which Guernsey could benefit from, but that's their view. And from a health point of view, we've got strong relationships with Southampton in terms of the oncology and different tertiary care that we will have to think of what is in the best interests of the Guernsey public before we move that. We did look at when our previous Director of Public Health retired. We thought we did do quite a bit of work to see could we have a Channel Islands Director of Public Health. Quite a lot of discussions went on that, but then we felt that there wouldn't be any savings from the proposals that are put forward. And so we decided not to do that. I mean, as things have panned out, thank goodness we didn't. I mean, we've got an excellent Director of Public Health. So we have to think, we won't do it for the sake of doing it. It's making sure that it does make sense. I would be, and I have said publicly, I'm willing to meet with the new government of Jersey as soon as they're elected and say, come on now, let's try and do it. As I say, I've tried before. It's not for not wanting to do it. It's making sure that we've got both sides aligned and saying we need to do it. Because I think we do, because we're forking out money doing the same things in both islands where we can make those savings. Despite.
But just to be clear, what you're saying in practice is that joint working may happen, but it's not a priority for it to be happening because it's not being prioritised through this process. If the new government come in and want to work together, then it would need to be reprioritised through this process.
Yes, but not necessarily. I think we need to look at it in a different way.
He's nodding in agreement and you're disagreeing.
Yeah,
so
it depends what it is.
It depends.
I don't think there is any disagreement in relation to that, because the intent would be, I will see a Deputy Salisbury will see a Deputy at the top, will see as representatives of the British Irish Council on the 7th, 8th. We will see the new Chief Minister, whoever he or she is. And we would intend to speak to him or her and say, as you said, we've got 3 years left, they'll have 4 years left. Sit down, what can we do? Now, whether it falls strictly within this, whether we need to reprioritise things, it doesn't seem to me that necessarily we will, because it depends on what the issues are. It really will depend.
And that's where I'm going. It depends on where we are. It's not necessarily saying right now we need to work with Jersey. It's about saying as we do things and as we change how we're looking at things, think, is there an opportunity to work with Jersey here? It's just as for me, it's more mindset than saying, right, we need to talk to Jersey, because I don't think it ever works doing that, in putting a load of politicians together and having a nice chat over sandwiches and saying, yes, we all want to work together. It's about instilling this within the normal BAU of government, saying, we're doing it this way. Is there a better way of doing it? And that's up to different committees to think, we need to make savings. We need to be more effective as we're going along. Can we do it better? And I think that's where I...
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that. I don't think there's disagreement here. I think if we... let's put it the other way around. If we did have a priority in here to work more with Jersey, you would be criticising us for not being able to fulfil that effectively because it takes two to tango. And so I think we do need to recognise the limitations of what we can prioritise when it comes to that. However, having said that, there's some of working with Jersey that for us should be just business as usual, and we should seek to do that wherever possible, where it makes sense, and where it's within our control to do so.
Desire from Jersey is not as strong because they're much larger and therefore they already have economies of scale that we don't have?
I think it's twofold. I think they not only have economies of scale that we don't already have, they have problems we don't have, and I think therefore there's always a fear from our point of view that we will be subsumed by Jersey's issues, and I think that's a relatively logical fear. But from their end, I think we've got problems they don't have. We have bailiwick issues regarding other islands that they don't have to deal with. But if we could overcome that in some way, I think it would require probably quite a high-level change of structure in both island governments. And if we're going to have a sustainable and long-term agreement on something, and that's not something that at the moment is appropriate for us to resource.
We don't want to give up on it. There may be, I don't know what the maybe would be, there may be one or two key issues that we will be able to develop and work with Jersey on.
And we can do that at the moment where there's good relationship. I've had a good relationship with a number of years with Senator Gorst, and that can work. But it's obviously dependent on some of those things, and at the moment, that's where we are.
Thank you. Perhaps a question you might have been expecting in relation to Brexit. To what extent do you think that the financial and staffing resources expended on dealing with responding to Brexit has hampered other government work streams, and what economic impact to the island it's had?
That's a very good question. I think it's probably too much for me to surmise exactly how that has affected. I do see particularly now more opportunities than negatives, particularly in the areas of new trade deals, and that is going very well. We are managing to keep pace with the UK, which is moving very fast on a number of new free trade agreements, and there will be significant opportunities for Guernsey businesses there. However, there's no doubt that in the process to get where we are, and particularly during the heightened period of negotiations, staff had to focus on that in the midst of COVID and everything else as well. So it's a bit difficult to tell quite what was the issue. All we know is that the Brexit work became useful, ironically to some degree, in the COVID process, because we scoped some of the issues like supply chains, which otherwise we'd have had to start from scratch. So that was fortuitous. At the moment, I think we're in a steady but busy period of working on what the future opportunities might be for us, which is positive, and I'd like it to remain so.
Question on Brexit before we move on. The Appendix 1 talks about increased staffing to deliver additional requirements post-Brexit. That's in connection with borders.
Yeah.
Can you quantify that? How many additional staff have been required?
Well, it is difficult to quantify at the moment. I think these are Home Affairs staff and environmental issues, particularly related to the potential new trade agreements we might enter into post-Brexit that would require border issues. We've obviously got some existing ones with the new agreement with the EU, but there may be more that's required on that, which is why there's a budget for that, and I can't particularly give you a number offhand, but that's inevitable. Where we'll need to be careful is where, in our economies of scale, having those sorts of controls, particularly, would have a negative effect, really, and they wouldn't be worth our while in investing in. And that's sometimes which is actually difficult to scope when we're trying to look at potential new opportunities.
Before we move on, Deputy Hellier, before the mic was back on, mentioned the point about the Treasurer could deal with the... Oh, okay, fine. Okay.
Deputy Fairbrush, during the hearing with your committee in January earlier this year, you stated the following: "We'll come before the States sooner rather than later with a joined-up air and sea policy.
Yep.
It should come before the States during the course of this year, and then the States can debate and decide what they're going to do. When can we expect to see this policy letter?"
You're great. It's good of you to remind me of that. I don't think I can speculate on a date just yet because things have taken a bit longer. I don't know if you can add anything, Steve, before I carry on.
I think that's right. There's an air policy framework that was appended to the Aurigny capitalisation policy letter that sets out the different roles of the different parts of the state, the different constituent parts of the states around that. There is an extant sea links policy. I think that goes back to 2018, an economic development one. The idea was that the operator agreement will reflect that and the changes subsequently, given Brexit and COVID and other matters and changes in the economy and tourism and various other factors. And so the plan had always been that the Sea Links framework would be updated alongside the operating agreement work. It would reflect the decisions of the states around the harbour, future harbour infrastructure as well, and then pull all of that together. As some of those constituent pieces have probably been pulled together at a slightly different pace, a bit like Heidi's, Deputy Salisbury's pointed out earlier, I think it's probably safer, for the states and for the community to see a joined-up air and policy Sea Links framework when a lot of those constituent pieces are in place.
Okay, so that is going to happen, is it? Because I was a little bit confused reading the document, because in the actions no longer required, it said determine air and sea links policy completed. I was just wondering where these policies live, because every time we ask about them, there seems to be references, and you have alluded to some of them about ramp access, route development.
That's right. Yeah.
Of course, the runway extension potentially tied in with this as well. Yeah. So just to be very clear, air and sea policy will come back before the states as one policy letter, will it?
And if I may, and if it, clearly there's work around that for the Committee for Economic Development and some of the other committees of the states as well. But yeah, the idea would be that it's all pulled back together. But the 2018 investment and connectivity objectives, I think, they are extant and they were quite high level, and I don't think they would have changed that much around what the island and the community wants from its air and sea links.
But to just finish off the answer to your question, yes, it should do. I mean, but what Mr. Wakeling is saying, we've got to wait for all the pieces of the jigsaw, not too long. We've got to wait for those pieces of jigsaw to be in, so that the states can then make a considered decision on air and sea links, because obviously sea links will affect air links and vice versa. So it makes sense for them to come before the states together.
Should do or will do?
Well, I think they will do. Yeah, but will do.
Good. That's fine. You can stop there.
But it should do and will do are not necessarily inconsistent definition, Pierre, because you should do something and then it means you will do it. So it will come before the states.
Should do also means you might not.
Sorry?
Should do also means you might not. But,
no.
So I'm happy
but it will come
do.
before the states, and then it'll be a matter for the states. As to precisely when, things sometimes take a bit longer in the states than we anticipate, but it certainly should come relatively soon, because hopefully we'll have the Condor situation sorted out from what the questions that were asked earlier relatively soon. The runway extension, that's got to be, the states have got to decide whether there is going to be a runway extension or not, because that will affect various issues. So, and that should come before the states. Well, that's our economic development, really, to bring it before the states so the states could debate it.
Yeah, it's later this year, isn't it?
Later this year.
Perhaps even Deputy Hellier might be able to answer this. If the states approve a runway extension, and I know that's a big if, we've seen perhaps, or numbers are alluding to around about 80 million. How would that be funded, and where will it sit in the current priorities?
Which runway?
So Guernsey runway extension, if it's approved.
What do you mean, how would it be funded? It would be funded out of our capital plan in the same way as this is.
Okay, and what priority, where will that sit in the current priority
list? It's up to the states to decide.
Yeah, it isn't there at the moment.
No.
And the states members need to appreciate amongst all the things that are funded in delivery mode, a runway extension isn't it, either in Guernsey or Alderney.
I think.
The thing is, it's obviously a very significant capital cost if it were to be approved by the states. And I think the question is, can you see any way that could go into this term's GWP, or would you envisage it to be a capital expenditure in next term?
Well, first of all, we've got to get through the debate to see whether the states agree in principle that we should be doing it, and then it goes into it could be pipeline, and then determine whether it's delivery. So it's very unlikely that anything will get to. Well, it won't be in spades in the ground or whatever we call it, tarmac on the runway before the. Oh no,
I certainly wouldn't have thought in terms of building it. But if it was to be prioritised for spending this term, would it push other things out of the plan?
But it's up to the states. The states determine whether it wants to borrow more or wants to shove something aside. Right. The same goes with the dairy, really, because we haven't got that extra money for the dairy. So if we approve that, members then need to think, well, is there something else we should give, or do we want to borrow more?
Well, let's just say we take the figures put forward, the highest figures. I mentioned 35 million for the dairy, 35 point something, and the 80 million. I've got no idea if that's an accurate figure, but let's just assume it is 115 million. Well, you've seen what is proposed over the lifetime of this Assembly. If the states, it would be a matter of a decision for the states, decided that those two were going to come to the top of the priority list, other things would have to be shunted aside, because we're suddenly not going to get 115 million pounds, all the resources to go and do these things in early course.
So that's a coach and horses through this plan.
Well, of course it would. I mean,
Yeah, okay.
all we're saying is,
Well, no, I disagree.
well, it'd be a significant variation.
It's a variation, but the government work plan is not a thing that's been set in stone from the beginning. It's always been an evolving. It is an evolving document and moves with what we know is happening at the time. We didn't know that Russia, well, some people had an idea they might, but Russia would invade Ukraine at the beginning of the year. So that has to be factored into any new plan, and to take
Approval of a runway in principle by the states would be the prioritisation without resources, and the resources would have to follow.
Absolutely.
Which is counter to the whole thrust of this process.
But no doubt that would be part of the debate in relation to the runway, which we have
only because not necessarily, but it's because things change, and people say, well, now all of a sudden, some building might collapse, we need to rebuild it. Well, yes, that will change in the plan. So we've had the runway extension has been a work that's been scoped, work that's been in the work plan since day one. It's whether now it goes further than that and goes into the pipeline as a capital project or not, and then we have to then rebalance the plan. But it's up to the states members to decide how they want the plan to go, and it will be either amended and evolve generally, and people just keep to exactly what's in here, or they say no, this will make a difference in terms of our economy or tourism or whatever they think. So we will do it, but that will mean that the plan changes. But I think the thing with the plan, I mean, it is a tool to determine what we can do. When, and making hopefully members understand where things are. It's to give them information and not working in a vacuum. And I think so much in the past members have worked in a vacuum and say, I like this and I like that, but don't see the big picture. This enables them to see the big picture, as you've shown today, and Deputy St Pierre going through all the different finances and linking it to something else. We've never had that before, and that's absolutely what we need.
It's the best we've got.
On that.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, John.
So I was just going to say, it's the best we've got, but I agree that if something like the runway extension was voted on by the states, it would significantly have to change the priorities of the plan. And I mean, if for some reason we weren't able to ship things in by sea, and there was some major issue there, we probably would choose to do that, and it would make sense. But that's a political decision. Where I think we've got to be careful is it's taken a lot of effort to get to this stage with government work.
So when in the policy letter you say the Policy and Resources Committee considers transport, connectivity and infrastructure policy has been developed, that there seems to be quite a big bit that's missing, which is namely the decision in relation to whether the states wish to proceed with a runway or not.
Well,
because
it has been developed. It doesn't mean it's been finalised in the sense that it's like Deputy Salisbury says, things can change. The states, out of a clear blue sky, no pun intended again, could decide that they're going to do something that's dramatic. This is a flexible document. It won't be the same next year as it is this year, when we bring the proposals for a revision in 12 months' time. The states will look at it. If by that time it's decided it's going to have a runway, and if I don't know where the £80 million comes from, the things always used to be cheap in Gabriel's years ago, but I mean perhaps the prices have gone up now. But in relation to that, it is £80 million. The states will have to decide it, because things will have to be knocked out, unless all of a sudden we get lots of revenue that we're unlikely to see.
Deputy Hellier was itching to make a comment.
I know, I just think, you asked an interesting question earlier when you were referring to me nodding about prioritising things with Jersey, and I think philosophically this is a plan for change. These are the extra things that we're doing. There's a lot of phasing in them. I think everybody acknowledges that it's too ambitious. There's no way most of this is going to get finished. So to some extent, adding a capital project like a runway extension, and I'm not saying I'm for or against it necessarily, that can be managed by phasing other things, but everybody needs to accept that if you prioritise one thing, it's whack-a-mole. I think, as I said, Absolutely, and I think that's right, and it should be part of the process for developing where we've got to here. But the reason I was nodding, I think, about the working with Jersey thing, because what's not in here is a lot of business as usual stuff, and working together on those things is all the time trying to improve that should be a priority that we all have. So I would like to see a sort of Concorde project. You know, Britain and France building a supersonic jet was a fantastic achievement at the time, particularly because of the massive differences between those two countries. And if we could find a Concorde project to work on with Jersey, I think that would be a really good thing to aim for.
Well, I don't think it would be a Concorde project that would work.
Not necessarily, but it needs to be something ambitious which has an output of some sort.
Can I stick with the idea of large sums of money and move on to borrowing to fund capital expenditure? So we're now told it's unlikely that there'll be a need for any further external borrowing. How close did we actually come to borrowing?
Not close enough is probably the answer.
No, you're expressing personal opinions, don't
well,
tell you.
perhaps, but I'm the only one it's never come to the committee as a decision one way or the other. Right. So I'm probably the only person as the lead that can comment on that, along with the treasurer, because we had several discussions about it, negotiations with possible lenders, but the need to press the button didn't occur.
Okay, and were any significant expenses incurred in that process?
Not that I'm aware of.
No. Okay. And does it concern you? Does it concern you that the predictions on the need to borrow now seem so far out?
No, I mean, this did come up. There was quite a lot of comment in the media about this, and why are the predictions not close enough and so on. But I think people really need to look. We seem to have forgotten that we had COVID and the most extraordinary financial times that anybody can conceive since the Marshall Plan. Betting on how much document duty we might get in September, for example, is pretty much impossible unless you rely on historical trends. And of course, a lot of those historical trends were literally thrown out of the window. We had a surplus of duty from cigarettes, for example, because people couldn't travel and buy cheap cigarettes on our airline. So I understand the frustration, but and at the same time we had a swing in our investment returns, for example. But thankfully, and I say thankfully, in an unapologetic way, most of the swings were in the right direction, which we should all be really grateful for.
With rising interest rates, we've missed the boat on borrowing anyway, haven't we?
Not necessarily. I think we're still a good bet. From an international lending perspective, and certainly there don't seem to be any lack of interest in that if we were to do it, but certainly the rates will be higher than we could have borrowed at even 6 months ago.
Do you think that the principal thing though is not the fact that we were wildly over optimistic on how fast we could spend capital on projects?
Not necessarily. I think there was Deputy St Pierre just referred to there being a window of opportunity there, and I think that was there, but it certainly sensed a high degree of reluctance to enter into borrowing to build things that we might not have decided what we want to do with them yet.
So, given the positive results of the investment managers, do you think that the state should be borrowing money just purely to invest?
We're not. It already is to some extent, but we're not. We don't have any plans to do that.
You're not pursuing that.
No, that would be effective.
And do you think the full delegated authority that was granted to you by the states on capital projects of just over £500 million will actually be used this term?
Well, it is being used. We've got the hospital modernisation. We see things moving up there already, work going on for education. So yeah, there's a lot of work is happening, and the money is being used.
Yes, I think we've 78 million, just under 78 million has already been used, but main on projects that obviously the Assembly has said that it wants us to prioritise.
Okay.
Unfortunately, we haven't been through the whole process beginning to end yet to be able to say whether it's a better way of doing it or not, but as soon as we know, I'm sure we'd be very happy to explain it.
Okay. In the GWP of last year, there was mention of public-private partnerships and a pilot project on that kind of scheme. Has any progress been made on that and on any particular scheme?
No. Well, there have been lots of discussions about different opportunities, and in fact, property, which is one of the things highlighted, it might look a bit soft in the budget because it's obviously always easy to beat a soft budget. Property is one of the areas where we could rather than simply selling property, we could gift it into joint ventures, for example, with developers and receive some of the benefit of selling what's subsequently built. Those things certainly are being investigated. I know there have been discussions. Deputy Mahoney's not here to give you the detail on that. And we will continue to look at other funding mechanisms wherever they represent good value for the public.
And one other thing, Deputy Hellier, while you appear to be in the chair here, in the recent States debate on secondary pensions, you referenced the £10 million that we had budgeted to receive from corporate corporate tax, and said that there'd been a delay on the international movements on that. Could you just explain that further?
So the chair of the OECD announced that he expected there to be a slip of a year in the implementation. Obviously I can't give any comments on what goes on in the US, but there seems to be more reluctance for the Senate perhaps to accept those proposals. And if they don't work on a global basis, they don't work on an individual basis. It's one of those, Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 are, in my view, that's a personal view rather than a committee one, if they're not entered into on a very wide global basis, then they won't work because they work as CFC type legislation. So if that were to happen, then that would be 10 million that has been budgeted for in the tax review that wouldn't be available to us unless we made other amendments.
Right, so you think, I mean, it could be more than a year's slippage?
It may not happen at all.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for that clarification. Do you have some questions, Deputy Fairclough?
In paragraph 1.7 of the executive summary, the report states that the states are running a deficit on the social security schemes, in particular the state's pension, which has a long-term funding requirement of £34 million per year. I'd just like to ask whether this figure includes the impact of increases to social security contributions that commenced in January and those due to increase over the coming years.
What paragraph of the executive summary? I thought you said 1.7. Maybe.
Yeah, sorry, of the funding investment plan.
Sorry. Okay, sorry.
I said the executive.
No, that's
summary.
okay.
I'm sorry, I can't answer that question. I can come back to you with what the answer is.
So that's where we are. That's where we are today. The states have made decisions which will reduce that.
Right.
As the plan B, if you like, that the social security, employment and social security put forward last year. But that is the position as we stand at the moment.
So unless we restructure a tax system,
Yeah.
those social security contributions will go up and up and up, but under the same structure. And we've shown that from the work we're doing, we're trying to make it more progressive, but the system we've got now isn't. But that's what we've got until a decision is made on the tax system.
Yeah.
Sorry, absent any changes, that will continue effectively on a.
Yeah, because Deputy Roffey was keen to bring that in, whatever happened,
Yes.
without having to wait for a tax review.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we go up beyond 13%.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Whilst we're talking about risks, can we just examine the impact of pay and inflation on pay, and particularly the fact that so many staff are effectively connected with the UK through their terms and conditions and packages? To what extent is that is that reflected in this plan to date, or to what extent is that a as yet unquantified risk?
It has to be a risk, inflationary risk and wage risk, particularly with the States as the island's largest employer, could have a significant inflationary effect locally. So we have to be very mindful of that and the effect which it could, as you rightly point out, on the plan. I can't go into very much detail. Deputy Mahoney's not here and he leads on those negotiations, so I can't really speak for the negotiations as they stand at the moment, but we have made a significant amount of progress with the respective unions that we have to speak to, and I understand that that's very positive and progressive, but we must be mindful that can change, and it may change significantly depending on what comes through. I mean, we just had the debate on secondary pensions. I mean, one of the reasons that I said some of the things that I did in that debate is that I understand from the feedback we've had from investment advisors, for example, that manufacturing costs have gone up by over 18% in the UK. The manufacturers have only passed about 12% or so of those costs on. So there's quite a lot of additional issues to come at us from an inflationary perspective, and we must be very thankful of the fact that we own our electricity provider, because most of the effect that we can see in the UK inflation rates is one of the differences why there is such a difference. Energy differential has been kept down by the price capping that we have through our provision of supply from France. So that those two things together, I think wage inflation and energy pricing are key for the next 18 months, 2 years probably.
Thank you.
Okay. Do you have any further questions there? No. So, an extant resolution directs the states directs an increase in overseas aid from the current 0.1% of GDP to 0.2% by 2030. I note there's no provision for this increase, or none that I could see in the funding and investment plan. How is it intended to meet that obligation?
Well, it'll be a matter for the states, won't it? As individually, I mean, the states could look at it again at budget time later this year as to whether it feels that should be advanced or not. I mean, at the moment, you're right, it isn't included because that is an extant resolution of the states, which they haven't developed as forcefully as they otherwise might for the reasons that we all are aware of. But again, that could be, and if that's so, that will have to be accommodated. It's more of a budgetary provision, in my view.
Right, okay. Deputy Gabriel.
Just thinking about civil service, we mentioned pay awards earlier. Is P&R concerned about morale in the civil service, especially in light of the requirement to maintain resources to deliver the GWP? And if so, what do you consider the current situation to be, and does the committee have concerns around that regard?
Well, I'm sure with any organisation, and this is a big organisation, the States of Guernsey, with thousands of employees, that morale can always be improved. But we all hear stories from different. I've heard for years as a deputy, this department is unhappy or that department's unhappy. But all we can say is that the intent of every politician, every senior civil servant, is to address issues of morale as they arise. I mean, sorry.
With two points that I'd make. One, I can understand the uncertainty that the transformation programme, certainly over the around developing the customer hub, could cause issues, and I know a lot of work did go on to try and support people during that whole process, but of course that will be unsettling. But also I think people can't, we shouldn't forget the sheer impact of managing COVID for 2 years has had on the organisation, particularly on the senior staff who've really done a fabulous job. But a lot of people are exhausted still from that. They haven't had, you finish on COVID for the first round of COVID, and you go into an election, new states members, new things they want to do, trying to get things done, then more COVID and Brexit, having to do with Brexit. So there's been a whole load of pressures on civil service to do a lot of things. And really, I'd say the work plan should help civil service in being able to manage the workload we have, because before the work plan, you've got various politicians going, we want to do this, we want to do that, and staff being pulled from pillar to post. The work plan absolutely helps staff to focus on the things that have been agreed should be done. So in that way, I'm hoping that helps civil service in what they do. Because it's the whole moving from one thing to another can cause instability and not knowing what they should be focusing on. But at least they can use, for very much we say this is a tool for politicians, it's very much a tool for civil service to be able to put forward, say, well, yes, you might say that you want to do that, President, etc., but this is the priority and this is what we're working to. So it kind of, in many ways, can help empower people, both politically and at officer level.
Thank you. So what's the current situation regarding the appointment of a permanent chief executive officer, and when can we expect an announcement?
This morning, do you want to?
We did. Been doing a lot of work from a job spec point of view. That's been agreed by P&R. We're currently working on the comms around that. I think we'll have a discussion tomorrow about this, but we're looking to start the process publicly, as it were, in the middle of next month. So with a view to an appointment middle of July, late July, middle, yeah, late July.
All things being well.
Thank you.
I'd just like to go back to the top 10 action list, because obviously that's where a lot of the focus is going to be, I would imagine, leading up to and in the state's debate on this. Admittedly, that they're all important, but is this list a matter of political decision rather than a decision based on the assessment of tangible benefits? I mean, how political was it to come up with this particular list of 10 items?
Because it's very difficult to say that anything involving politicians isn't political, but it takes into account the resources we have and saying, right, there'll be people say we want to do all these things, but it actually uses all the same people. You've got to balance. You could say, well, all right, then if we only want to do these things, so we won't do any of that and we'll get rid of all those people. But we say this is about balancing the resources we've got and saying what are the priorities of different committees. And so some people will say, no, we don't think we should look at blue and green economy, but they might want to say we want to look at more things that relate to the actual monetary and the financial economy sort of thing, but then they've got to think about, well, where are we going to get the resources to do it? It's about managing the resources that we have. So that's very much that. But I would, I think they're all key areas that we should be focusing on. For me, there might be some areas I would want to be more focused and say, instead of doing this big wide bit of work, can we look at this smaller amount of work? But this is a good start. It's all, at the end of the day, we have a consensus system of government, and that's what you've got to work with. Whether certain politicians like it or not, that is what we have until such time as we don't.
But I think you've hit on a really important point, Ebony Salisbury, and that's that the resources, particularly the staff resources, as we've already touched on, are often the same people across a lot of these areas, and we're looking at the same people time and again, and expecting them to deliver things. I mean, the top 10 actions in the first 6 months, was that realistic?
Yeah, and I think it's shown quite a lot of progress on that. I think more progress was achieved by doing it that way than would have been if we hadn't had top 10 actions. I think the resources could have been spread much more widely, and we wouldn't have had that real concentration on those top 10. Some areas, like the development agency area, probably was slower than others, but a lot of stuff has been done because people have known it's a top 10 action. I think that will probably develop even more for the next year, particularly as we have the resources getting tighter.
Whatever action the state's decides on 28th, 29th of June when we debate the government work plan, I think the civil services people that we've talked about, and there aren't that many of them, and they are stretched, would expect us, that's a collective us, all of us that make the decisions, to be consistent and cogent and make sure that we don't then say 3 months in, unless there is something that comes out that nobody can reasonably foresee, that these are the action plans, these are the ones that should be addressed, and let them get on and help us make the policy.
Policy and Resources agree in 7.6 that additional resources to be redeployed from other areas, touching upon what we're discussing here, towards housing matters. And I don't think there'll be many people in this room that disagree that that is an absolute priority. Are those other areas overstaffed, or will business as usual and committee work suffer as a result of the redeployment of staff to serve that particular work stream?
Resources, I would say, resources are tight. It's where we see that there will be flexibility, and where we can move people from work that they might have been doing previously in terms of policy development. We assign them elsewhere. What does work much better now, and the change that the interim CEO has done, is have the committee secretaries report through to the policy team, the head of policy, whatever the title is. Anyway, basically the person who was the lead on developing this policy letter. So the policy link is much stronger than it was before, and it was reporting in a different line, which didn't make sense. This helps in terms of the coordination and policy, and I think the committee secretaries have been very good in working together with that policy head of policy to make that happen. So I think that makes it far more joined up. And the committee secretaries working very closely together in a way which is really good for the states, instead of having it works against that silo way of working. I think that's one thing we've always been having to battle against and manage, but I think that is one change that's been made that will help. And has helped in the development of this policy letter, because there'll be committees who will have wanted to do lots and lots of things, and they're being, have been advised throughout the process, look, you can't do everything. It's about managing what are the key things that you really want to do, taking into account, yes, policy development, but also BAU.
Deputy Hellier has already used the words too ambitious, potentially, this plan. Deputy Fairbrush, do you now regret using the term action this day?
No, not at all. Action, absolutely, because that's got to be interpreted in a common sense way. I don't know. I'm now expressing a personal view. My colleagues may well hold a different view. They probably do. I think the last several states have done almost nothing of any consequence that have helped in relation to it. We've been forced. You touched upon it before with the MyGov thing in the question you asked. We've been foisted, I think would be the right word that I would choose, with policies that, to me, were ill thought out and hadn't been developed as well as they should. We've got to address that. Now, I, as an active person, would like to get on with things much quicker than we can, but because we're a democracy, and long may that continue, and because we've got procedures, some of which will need to be changed, things take longer than they should be. So I certainly don't regret that phrase at all. And I would ask you, Deputy Fairclough, and all your colleagues on scrutiny and all the other members of the states to try and get some action this day, rather than we always talk things and take too long to make decisions.
Can I just comment on that? Sorry to come in there, but I think having seen several, being part of, I'm the only member of the previous PNR here, so we've had some criticism of the previous thing. So you can level it at me if you want, but I think the point is, I think we have been overcautious in the past, and that's the opposite of overambitious, I suppose. It is overcautious. Trying to get to the right balance is one thing, but that's not the only. Ambition or a proper degree of ambition isn't the only thing that might hinder your progress. It's circumstances around you outside of your control. And of course, economic and other social circumstances in the last few years have come upon us in ways that we weren't expecting, no one was expecting, and that's already been reflected then. So I don't think that, I think we're heading in the right direction. I would say that it's probably, from my point of view, I'd rather be more ambitious than more cautious at this time, because I think we do need to demonstrate, particularly where younger people and where those who are less able in Guernsey are losing out. We need to demonstrate a volition on behalf of government, because no one else will act on their behalf.
That segues into one of my final questions, which is in paragraph 5.7 of the policy letter, you have a sentence which reads, "The need to develop clearer strategic aims is acknowledged." Is that what you're referring to, Deputy Letarque, in terms of ambition, in terms of articulating what it is that the States wants to try and achieve?
Sorry, I'm just trying to find it. 5.7.
The need to develop clearer strategic aims is acknowledged. So,
I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have talked about and developed those, at least the three in 1.1, about securing BWIC's resilience, maximising communities' collective potential, and ensuring we're competitive as an economy. We can have lots of other fine words, but these are things that I would have thought the population would expect and hope that we could do. We've got a plan. We talk about, is it ambitious? Have we put too much in it? But it has been resourced. A lot of work behind the scenes with Steve here, Bethan, policy lead, to really make sure, with all the committee secretaries, with the committees, to make, can we resource it? But there is BAU. There's other things that happen all the time. Things happen that need to be managed, and we don't live in, you know, in this little bubble where nothing changes. With a fair wind and nothing changing, yes, we can do this, but other stuff happens. It just does. We know that, and we have that. Those are the things. So this is, yes, it might be ambitious, but it should be. It could be achievable, and we need to work on the basis of saying yes, it could be.
Deputy Fairbrush, you said that the states need to get on and do things. How does that fit with the vote on the CERSI that we had on the secondary pensions review?
Because we've got to do things sensibly. Now, I know you were on the other side. I think all four of you voted the same way, so you've all got the same mind in relation to that and other things. I believed, and I think, well, I don't think I know, the majority of the states believed that just to do something now, action this day shouldn't be silly action this day or unnecessary action this day. Therefore, and I think the decision of the states was too many double negatives. They're not going to do secondary pensions. In other words, it's likely to be approved. If the CERSI had failed, I was going to vote there and then to implement the proposals, as was, I know, because he said so with the State's Deputy Trot, who also voted the same way as I did in relation to that. But he and I and 18 others took the view that it should all be considered later in the year, where we have a different view. We have more information, I should say, not necessarily a different view, more information as to where the world economy lies, where we are, and other issues that we've got to address. One of the things we've got to address is the tax debate, the tax structure. The views now that people would take were probably different than the views they might have taken 3 or 4 months ago on certain topics because of the way that it's happened. And they may well change again between now and November, December.
Okay, thank you. That brings me on quite neatly, actually, to my very last question, which is about the cost of living and the current economic circumstances. The In-Work Poverty Review that Scrutiny published in 2018 revealed the real struggles of working islanders were having at that time, and that was before all of the current economic crisis. The Bank of England governors recently talked about apocalyptic food prices. What measures will PNR be taking to assist the potentially increasing numbers of islanders experiencing in-work poverty?
I think we will address that. Because clearly Deputy Helly will be the lead on that in relation to what we can do, because we've seen what the UK are doing. We've got to be addressing that. It may be that I don't want to be expressing a view that may be contrary to my committee members, because we haven't discussed that at any length yet. But it might be that we believe that we can't let that wait till the budget, 3 or 4, 6 months' time. We've got to do something between now and then. But whatever we want to do is make sure it's a considered view and something we can realistically afford.
Well, for me, it's not just for PNR. And certainly the growing inequality on the islands has been a concern of mine for a while, and I'm trying to, you know, I've said that publicly before, but there are aspects of what's already happened, what's been done was changing the family allowance system, so we've got reduced doctors' fees for children and free dental checkups that weren't there before, but that was done through cross-committee working last term. There's the work that Health and Social Care are doing, which started last term on primary care, about how we can make that more affordable, because we know that's a big issue, but also housing and the work being done there, because a lot of the costs for people, biggest amount of costs are in housing, and as you'll see, one of the actions in here is around what policy levers and stuff that we can do to support people on that front. I mean, I can't say all the detail behind that at the moment. Haven't been involved on that side of things, but those are the sort of things that we do need to look at, and a view to what is actually happening on the island rather than what's happening elsewhere in terms of cost of living. We've got to actually make sure that what we do is the right thing and we're targeting it properly. We've got Employment Social Security looking at the economic indicators, and the work they're doing from a benefits point of view, I think will go some way to supporting it, and I think that's coming. Is it later? It might be later this year in terms of what they see that the balance should be on that side. So it is not a PNR necessarily. There might be short-term input that we can make just to tide people over if we're finding things really get out of hand here from a cost point of view. But it's definitely a whole state's approach that's needed.
Sorry, do you mind I just ask a follow-up on that? Is it not inconsistent for government to be increasing waste charges in the middle of the cost of living crisis That's something that's directly under our control, and yet we're choosing to do that now.
Well, that will be an issue I would have thought, for the committee concerned putting it forward, and you might well be right, but that's not...
They've made the decision. And
yes, they have.
Yeah.
But the same goes for energy, which is more significant, I think.
Can I just finish up with one supplementary to my last question, because we're now past 4 o'clock. Looking at the resolutions to be rescinded in Appendix 9 of the policy letter, number 9 is about overcoming poverty, intergenerational and intergenerational poverty. The reason given by PNR for rescission is that new policy is now done through the GWP. Can you tell me how this important work is being picked up, especially given that it is more pressing now?
Yes, through what I've just said just now. Various strands being brought together. As I say, it's something that's of specific concern to me, so I have been keeping an eye on it myself. And certainly through the government work plan, it was definitely a theme that I wanted to make sure that we were absolutely focused on that before actually all these headlines and what's specifically what we've been seeing happening in the UK, and before Russia invaded Ukraine. It's definitely something that is of concern to me, and that's why it does run through some of the elements in here, but it's not just me. It's just knowing that if we don't deal with that, that causes more issues down the line. So.
And it is a policy and resources resolution,
Absolutely.
but it does bear on, obviously, the Committee for Employment and Social Security. Can you tell me why no consultation was undertaken with that committee about rescinding this resolution?
That is not what I'm aware of, because, as I say, it's the committee authority and sponsors of PNR and ESS, and so I would have assumed that they would have been involved in that. I mean, it doesn't. If ESS want to keep it, that they can. I mean, I don't think it's a big issue, quite frankly. We could keep it back in. But that work is already happening anyway. That's all we're saying. So it's not going to stop that work. It's just that we don't think it's duplicating what's already happening. And I can assure you that that's not going to disappear.
Okay, thank you. Right. Well, that's all the questions we have. But before we wrap up, if Ms. Haynes, did you want to just pick up on that point about education that you mentioned previously?
Yes, so it was just going back to the table in 4.8. I think there were two observations. One was the additional 5.1 million, 5.01 million for education. And note 5 below, when I've gone back and totted it up, there's a combination in there of one-off expenditure and ongoing expenditure. If you look at the one-offs plus the ongoing for the years that are mentioned, it does come back to the just over 5 million that's mentioned there. And then the second point was around that table not tying up with the annexes, and the reason for that is because what's shown in the table in 4.8 is for the full period of the F&I plan, so including 2021, and what's included in the annex is just future expenditure. So, for example, if I give the example of the investment in the finance sector, 500,000 was spent in 2021, plus the 2.5 million that's shown here takes you to the 3 million.
Okay. So one final question from me. What is the current state of progress and timeline for the implementation of the IPSAS?
Yes, so you'll see in the accounts that were published last week that there's a commitment, there's a time frame in there now to full implementation by the 2024 accounts.
You see that the whole list of the evaluation of fixed assets for the first time, which makes interesting reading.
Yeah.
Well,
So next year they will be on the face of the balance sheet, but they're just included as an appendix this year.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, and thank you to all the witnesses for attending and increasing the public awareness and the understanding of the work that the Policy and Resources Committee does. Thank you to the members of the media for attending, and to those members of the community tuned into the live stream. Scrutiny undertakes regular public hearings with all principal committees to increase public understanding of key areas of government and enhance openness and transparency. And details of future hearings will be announced on the Scrutiny website and on its Twitter account. And so the hearing is now closed. Thank you. Thank you.